Just imagine stepping into a multidimensional portal and experiencing an entire lifetime in a distant world, only to find out that when you step back through that portal and return home, only a few minutes have passed and you've actually got a whole nother life to live out again. Now, the strange relationship between Narnia time and Earth time is something that's pretty well known, but I've spent some time looking into it, and Narnia time might just be weirder than you think. What accounts for this time dilation? What's the ratio of Earth time to Narnia time, and is it always the same? And maybe most importantly, is this a natural process or are there other factors at play here? Now today, we're going to talk about the weird nature of Narnian time, digging into some of the moments where Earth time and Narnia time intersect and asking some even bigger questions about the implications of everything we find. But first, I want to take a moment and thank the Patreon supporters that make this video possible. I am so thankful for the support and encouragement that you give every week in order to make something like this happen. If you're interested in supporting this channel, please join the others in our great community over at patreon.com/intothewardrobe. Now, believe it or not, we don't have a lot of time today, so let's go ahead and get started. It's time to leave the Shadowlands behind and journey to a world that's more real than our own. It's time to follow me into the wardrobe. We noticed the relationship between Earth time and Narnian time pretty early on in Narnian history. The first account of Susan Pevensie stepping through the wardrobe involves Lucy spending several hours with Tumnus before finally going back to our world. And when she does get back, she was shocked to discover that only a few seconds had passed on Earth. And later on, when Lucy returns to Narnia, Edmund follows her, stepping through the wardrobe just a few seconds later in our world. But when Lucy and Edmund meet up in Narnia, it turns out that a few seconds difference in our world added up to a lot more time in Narnia. Edmund was in Narnia probably less than 30 minutes, a 20-minute walk to Lantern Waste and back, and a conversation with the White Witch that probably lasted about 10 minutes max. But Lucy had been there for at least an hour longer, after having lunch at Tumnus's house. So just a few seconds head start in our world resulted in at least an hour's time difference in Narnia. The Pevensies themselves would experience this time dilation over and over again, even after spending 15 years as kings and queens in Narnia, after they chased the white stag through Lantern Waste and suddenly spilled out of the wardrobe onto the mansion floor back in our world. Even then, they would find that no less than 5 minutes had passed in our world. Now, this time disparity is seen pretty much anytime anyone transitions from our world to Narnia or back. And it seems like the basic relationship between Narnian time and our time is that for every second that passes in our world, many, many, many minutes or even hours or days pass in the Narnian world. Now, at this point, you may notice that the weirdest thing about the Earth-Narnian time relationship is that it doesn't seem to be consistent, like at all. I've done the math and it's actually very inconsistent. I've actually done some rough calculations here. For example, the time between the end of Prince Caspian and the beginning of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is a Narnian to Earth time ratio of about 3 to 1. But for other events, the ratio is more like 400,000 to 1. Edmund is the first to figure out this unpredictable relationship after being called back in Prince Caspian. And he lays out his theory saying, and that means that once you're out of Narnia, you have no idea how Narnian time is going. Why shouldn't hundreds of years have gone past in Narnia while only 1 year has passed for us in England? But it isn't until the Voyage of the Dawn Treader that we get official confirmation from the narrator that this is true. The narrator explains, Narnian time flows differently from ours. If you spent 100 years in Narnia, you would still come back to our world at the very same hour or the very same day on which you left. And then, if you went back to Narnia after spending a week here, you might find that 1,000 Narnian years have passed, or only a day, or no time at all. You never know till you get there. Now, according to my calculations, it seems like on average the time dilation is usually a ratio of about 1,000 to 1 to 2,000 to 1. But as I mentioned before, the greatest time dilation ratio is about 400,000 to 1. And it happens during the Golden Age, when the Pevensies ruled Narnia as kings and queens, growing to full adults over the course of 15 years, before returning back to our world where only minutes had passed. Now, I don't know about you, but I would be thrilled at the chance to have an extra lifetime or even just a few extra years set aside to prepare for the challenges that I know I would eventually face in this world. I like to think that I got a taste of that during my time as a student at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, who are also the sponsor of today's video. Now, when you study at Southern Seminary, you prepare for the real world in the real world. You see, the faculty at Southern aren't just world renowned scholars and theologians, even though they are. They're also pastors and churchmen who invest in preparing you to serve the church no matter what your calling might be. So, if you're thinking about going deeper in your theological training so that you can better serve your church, I can't recommend Southern Baptist Theological Seminary highly enough. You owe it to yourself to check out the link in the description of this video and find out more about why Southern is trusted for truth and ready for faithfulness. Okay, so we know that the Narnian Earth time continuum, as I like to call it, doesn't follow a fixed ratio. But my question is, why does it change? And what accounts for those differences? Now, one of the first things I want to point out is that while it's totally possible in our world to experience a similar sort of time dilation thanks to relativity, there's no way that relativity could explain what's happening here. For one, the scale of time dilation that we're looking at here is massive. The only way that we could reach the sort of ratios we're talking about here is if Narnia was either on the event horizon of a black hole, in which case the gravitational forces would totally crush any life form, or if the Narnian solar system were hurling through space at 99.99999996875% the speed of light, which would cause planet-destroying whiplash during those times when the ratio ends up getting smaller. So the other issue is that relativity would actually work backwards, where in any case, our Earth years would fly by while Narnian time would actually seem extremely slow. So this is not relativity that we're looking at here. There's some other principle at play. Now, I thought it might be helpful to try to put together a visual representation of Narnian time versus Earth time, and I started out by using the incredibly helpful and important timeline of Narnia given to Walter Hooper by C.S. Lewis himself. Now, this timeline is particularly useful because it gives us some hard dates to compare based on significant events throughout the Narniad. And if you look at the timeline, you can see that all the events in the Narniad took place across 50 Earth years, beginning in 1900 when Digory and Polly were transported with a set of magic rings to the Wood Between the Worlds, and ultimately through a fateful portal where they witnessed the very creation of Narnia, or Narnia Year Zero. Now, the timeline ends 50 Earth years later, and over 2,500 Narnian years later, when the great friends of Narnia witness Aslan awaken Father Time and bring an end to Narnia itself. And throughout the timeline, there are many events that tie the Earth years directly to Narnian years. So I put these years in a spreadsheet and I created this graph. And by looking at the slope of the graph, you can see that the relationship between Narnian time and Earth time changes pretty drastically from time to time. Now, this is interesting, but I think that this visualization by Tony Decker over at his blog Scientific Gems really helps understand much better what's going on. Now, this visualization shows that from point to point in Earth time, Narnian time has been folded over or compressed between the points on the Earth timeline. It's kind of like bending a tent pole to fit between the fixed grommets of a tarp. Now, I want you to hold that visual in your mind because we'll get back to that in just a minute. You see, one thing I began to realize when I looked at this graphic is that all the corresponding events, those moments when the Narnian timeline relates to Earth time, well, they involve humans from our world making the jump between Earth and Narnia, or vice versa. And it's in these crossover moments, and only these moments, that we're actually able to observe the time dilation in action. Now, that might seem obvious, but it's important because it draws out the fact that even though we know from the Wood Between the Worlds that there are countless other worlds in the Narnian multiverse, we don't actually have any recorded instances of beings from other worlds visiting Narnia, with the exception of Jadis, who was brought to Narnia by two citizens of Earth. So what does this mean and why does it matter? Well, is there a special connection between Earth and Narnia that's unique and exclusive among all the worlds in the Narniad? Well, I think the answer might be yes, and I have a theory to explain why this might be. I actually got this idea from my favorite movie of all time, the indie cult classic Plummer. Now, if you haven't seen it before, you've got to check it out. It's a time travel mind bender that you'll have to rewatch lots of times to really understand and actually use scientific principles to form the basis of the time travel concept. The time travel begins by starting up a machine. And the moment this machine is turned on, an anchor in time is created. A continuous thread that stretches through time until the point in time that the machine will eventually be turned off. Now, what does this have to do with the Narnian Earth time continuum? Well, not much, but what if there's a similar anchor? What if there's a thread that was created at a certain moment in Narnian time that runs from the beginning all the way to the end? A thread that connects together Narnian time and Earth time that also spans the length of the entire timeline of interconnectedness between Earth and Narnia. What would that anchor be? Well, what if the anchors are the lives of Polly Plummer and Digory Kirke? To put it another way, what if Narnian time were designed to be constrained or compressed to fit within the lifetimes of the first early witnesses to the creation of Narnia? Now, going back to the tent analogy, imagine that Digory and Polly's witness to the creation of Narnia is like the first corner grommet on that fixed tarp, and the opposite grommet on the far edge represents the end of Digory and Polly's lives on Earth. What if Narnian time was meant to fit between those 2 points? So, like the tent poles, it would be bent or compressed in order to fit between those 50 years on Earth. Simply put, Digory and Polly exist as the thread that binds together or entangles our world and Narnia. Now, this temporal entanglement actually makes sense. After all, Digory and Polly weren't just observers of Narnia's creation, they actually directly influenced Narnia history at the point of inflection, as pointed out by Aslan himself by bringing evil into Narnia. They altered Narnia's space-time continuum at the very beginning, and they were ordained to be there at the very end when it was all set right. Now, if we accept this idea that Narnian time dilation is actually just time compression, intentionally compressed to connect certain Narnian events with certain milestones on Earth, does that explain the variability in the other dilation that we're seeing? So just suppose for a minute that certain events on the Earth timeline and the Narnian timeline are actually intended or pre-planned or prearranged to coincide or intersect. For example, if Digory and Polly were intended to witness the creation of Narnia, and the Pevensies were intended to be the ones to fulfill the Golden Age prophecy 1,000 years later in Narnian time, that time had to have been compressed in order to fit the time on Earth between when Digory and Polly put on the magic rings and 50 years later when the Pevensies stepped through the wardrobe into Narnia. Now, if you think of it on the Narnian side of the equation, Earth time isn't being compressed, it's being stretched. So that 50 Earth years are being stretched across 2,500 Narnian years. So for example, when Caspian blew the horn to call the Pevensies back to Narnia, 1,300 years had passed since they'd last left Narnia. But in our world, they were hoping in all their hearts to return to Narnia only a year later. So if we assume that those two moments were intentionally designed to correspond interdimensionally, 1 year of Earth time had to be stretched across 1,300 years of Narnian time to make it work. And so you see that if different milestones across each universe are intentionally designed to align, there has to be variability in the flow of time in order for these moments to line up. Now, of course, in the end, the real question is, if it was actually designed this way, who designed it? Who controlled these intersections of space and time? Well, the answer may be obvious to most of you by now, but it may have been made most clear in the Narniad itself, at the very end of the timeline on the final day of Narnia. You see, on that day, it was Aslan himself that woke up the great sleeping giant, Father Time. And then, with a mighty roar and a shout, he proclaimed to the whole universe, "It is time." You see, in this moment, we witness very clearly and very vividly that Aslan doesn't just command the elements, the nations, or even the cosmos. He commands time itself. Not only in Narnia, but in our world as well. Because when it all comes down to it, he is the beginning and the end.